know, twice in 1 week.
Well, we don't see, where's Rob these days?
I don't know. He was supposed to be here tonight, and once again, at the last moment, the wife emailed and said he wouldn't be here.
He's several now, isn't he?
Craig initiated a little bit of a spank. Craig initiated a little bit of a spank, so he's not.
Bit of a spank?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Some of the things that came away from it looked questionable, so I think that might have had something to do with it, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. It is what it is. What did you think of Tuesday?
It was kind of fun. Huh?
Boy, I'll tell you, Laura blew my mind.
Who?
Laura Scott? She really blew my mind.
You like what she said?
I did.
How come you don't put her next to me?
I don't know. Maybe Craig is afraid. He sets everything up here. Maybe he's afraid that you gotta sway her somehow. I don't know.
No, I think it was the other way around.
You looking forward to retirement?
Listen, no.
Yeah. Watch out for those honey-do lists.
I'm not worried about that. I'm just, I'm going to miss working with all the members because they really were.
Well, you met a lot of people along the way and made a lot of good friends, too. Could be hard
A real nameplate.
Did you get one?
Yeah.
That's excellent.
I have 8 more years.
Wow, it's you again.
It's me again. It's like a bad penny.
No, you're a good penny.
All shiny and new. Nice to see everybody made it out of that big snowstorm. We got about 10, 12 inches where I live.
Who's this to say? Do we get this at every meeting? Didn't you guys already give this to us?
Craig might be.
Craig's just making sure.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the regular February meeting of the Concord Zoning Board of Adjustment. We'll follow our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we'll call the cases in the order in which they appear in the agenda. I'll ask the appellant to come forward, be sworn in, and have a seat in the chairs to my right, and give us any information that he or she would like us to have about the appeal. We ask that the appellants confine their testimony as much as possible to a 10-minute interval. Following that, we will invite testimony from anyone in the audience who is in favor of the appeal or in opposition to the appeal, and we ask that the audience members confine their testimony to 5 minutes. After all of that, we'll check in with code enforcement to see if there's any information from their office germane to the case, and then if any new information has been offered that appears to need clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to offer that clarification, not a new argument, prior to our closing the public testimony portion of the hearing. Normally, in most cases, the board will act on each case before moving on to the next. Did I leave something out?
No.
Oh. You were looking at me that way.
I was just kind of looking at Nick using a magnifying glass.
Oh.
It's like,
The first case tonight is a recessed case, case 0418 West Portsmouth Street Solar LLC for L.A. Brochu Incorporated. The applicant proposes a 54-acre, 10-megawatt solar farm and requests a variance to Articles 2841E maximum lot coverage and Section H, the table of dimensional regulations, to permit a maximum lot coverage of 27.8%, where a maximum lot coverage of 10% is permitted for a property at 67 West Portsmouth Street in an RO, a residential open space district. Do I hear a motion to take this out of recess?
So moved.
Is there a second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. Are the representatives from the West Portsmouth Street Company here? Please come forward.
Over here.
Over here would be better.
Gotcha.
That way the audience can see everybody's face.
Where's the best spot to put the plans?
Probably right back here.
Well, thank you for having us.
May I swear you in?
Yes, please.
You swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you very much. If you would give us your names as you testify, that would be helpful.
Sure. So my name is Aaron Svedlow. I'm the project director for Nextera Energy Resources, which is an affiliate and owner of West Portsmouth Street Solar LLC.
My name is Jeremy Eggleton with the law firm of Orr and Reno. I represent Nextera.
I'm Mark Trumbauer. I'm with Nextera Energy as a project manager.
Art Trumbar, was it?
Mark Trumbauer.
Mark Trumbar, sorry.
And if I could start out with just a little history of the project and some of the reasons why we're looking to develop a utility scale solar project in Concord. So first off, the region, New England, consists of one electrical grid. And apologies if any of this is sort of remedial, but it's germane to why we're developing a project here. The region as a whole, including New Hampshire, is in need of new generation power, substantive amounts of power. There's about 4,600 megawatts of generators that are going to come offline in the next 5 years or so in New England. So in order to replace that, a lot of states and developers are looking to renewables to make up for that shortfall that's coming up in the next few years. So that's one of the reasons why we're developing this project. One of the reasons why we're looking to Concord to develop this project here is because of the proximity to existing electrical infrastructure. Solar power, unlike other types of generation, cannot be developed unless it's in very close proximity to substations, essentially. And if you look at the end of West Portsmouth Street, there's an existing electrical substation that the project would plug into. So this project was selected about a year ago in a Connecticut request for proposals for renewable energy projects. So a portion of the power from this project will be sold to the utilities in Connecticut. However, the power, the actual electrons generated from the project will be consumed locally. They'll be put onto the grid here in Concord, and they'll be consumed here in New Hampshire. Essentially, Connecticut pays for them, but they're consumed here. In addition, because we're putting power onto the grid in this area that's very low priced, because there's no fuel costs, it will lower what's called the locational marginal price for the area, the LMP, and will actually suppress electrical rates for the area. So I just wanted to lay that background of part of the reason why we're here. A portion of the project is also available. The offtake, the electricity from the project is also available for sale to the city of Concord. We've had conversations with the city before, but if the project were to go forward, we would expect to make some of it available to the city of Concord if indeed the city wanted to purchase some of the power. You had mentioned Len Brochu in our initial introduction there. Len Brochu is our landlord, essentially, for the project. We have a lease agreement with the landowner to host the project for a 20-year plus period. At the end of the useful life of the project, we're required to remove the project and all of the electrical infrastructure from the grounds. So this is truly a temporary project. That's a requirement in our lease agreement. And also, if we were able to get to the next level here through the planning board, often that's a requirement in our land use permits for us to remove the facility. So typically both in the lease agreement and with the land use agreement. So why are we here tonight? We're here to request a variance for lot coverage. And one of the reasons why we need to request that variance is because of the panels, the panel area. And I'm going to let Jeremy talk a little bit more about that and explain our thinking around that issue.
So I've been asked to speak briefly about the application of the zoning ordinance to this particular project, and obviously you as a body are charged with and have the power to interpret the ordinance. So everything I say is obviously subject to your review and consideration, but allow me just to make a couple of points. The first, setting aside the variance criterion for the first moment, I was looking carefully at the lot coverage requirements and the language of the regulation that governs the maximum lot coverage. Because when I started looking at this application, it occurred to me that we may not need a variance in this case, although that's what we're here to seek, and we're going to address the criteria for that in a moment. But it did occur to me that there may be a way to permit this project without encountering the variance issue. And if you look at the language relating to dimensional standards and maximum lot coverage, there's no specific definition for what constitutes lot coverage. So what the ordinance says is no buildings, structures, or impervious surfaces or combination thereof shall be constructed on a lot such that the area of the lot covered by buildings, structures, and impervious surfaces when calculated as a percentage of the total lot area shall exceed the percentage specified for that particular zoning district. And obviously, when we think about structures and buildings, we're contemplating a building. And the problem with a building from a lot coverage perspective is it occludes the ground in that particular location. It actually displaces the ground, covers up the vegetation. A solar array doesn't do that. It sits in a cradle where the actual amount of structure or infrastructure that contacts the ground is substantially less than the panel itself, which sits overhead. And the result of that is that the ground itself is allowed to continue more or less undisturbed in its natural state. You have vegetation, you have animals, you have grass, and critically from the perspective of the zoning ordinance, you have absorption capacity. So water and runoff can be absorbed into the ground as if it were not developed at all. And I submit that when you look at that requirement, there being no specific definition for lot coverage, that's the concern for this particular regulation. So you don't want to have a piece of land where it's all been paved over and the land itself is no longer capable of absorbing water. And that's why building structures and impervious surfaces are taken as a collective. And so I think that this body has the power to grant this application without actually even addressing the zoning ordinance and the variance requirements at all.
I don't think we do tonight, because it would have had to have been noticed that way.
Well, I think the board does have the power under the statute to make such order as is required. And so I think it is up to you to consider what you hear before you. If you believe that proper notice was required to raise that particular argument, then please let us know. If you think that it's something that would give you an opportunity to allow this project to go forward. But I do think that you can, the notice was required to hear the nature of the project itself. And if you look at the statute, the language governing what your power is under any particular case states that you're able to make such orders as is required. So that's your interpretation that you're allowed to make. That's my perspective on it, for sure.
Okay, but you're going to argue the variance, correct?
We definitely are.
All right.
I just wanted to note that in the first instance.
And if I could just add one more thing about the impervious area. We do a number of projects all across the U.S., but primarily here in New England is my focus. In all of the states surrounding New Hampshire, and New Hampshire is working on this, solar's new here, but in Maine and Vermont, in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, the actual panel area is not considered impervious. It's the posts of the panels themselves, the roads, and the other associated equipment, but the panel areas are not considered impervious. In fact, in Maine, our entire solar arrays are considered stormwater buffers because they function as a meadow, which has a specific definition under the Stormwater Act in Maine. So I just wanted to submit that so that you're aware of sort of what the other jurisdictions around New Hampshire and likely New Hampshire eventually will be viewing solar as.
Ask for one clarification. Page 2 of your application indicates that the impervious area, which I assume you're referring to, is going to be 27.8%.
Right, and that, in a sense, touches on your question, Mr. Carley, and that is, we're here because the original application was rejected appropriatly by the code enforcement officer, and it was rejected because he believed that the impervious surface and the lot coverage was dictated by the size of the solar panels. And so we're here seeking a variance from that particular requirement. But I think this is the body that would hear the alternative argument that that particular aspect of the decision didn't interpret the zoning ordinance correctly on that point. And so if you look at the panel coverage, that's the 27% we're talking about. If you look at the just the portion of those solar panels that touch the ground, you're talking about 2.5%.
Yeah, 2.5% roughly, which is the access roads, the pads for the electrical equipment, and the posts for the panels themselves. The panels, as you can see from the image behind me, there's just a small post. This is a recently constructed project, and you can already see the grass coming in underneath the panels there.
The ratio of the panel to the post is very high.
Yeah, the panels are roughly, 3 feet in the front to about 8 feet in the back. It depends on what tilt we end up doing. So,
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because this is a little bit unusual in your presentation, I'd like to bring Craig into it and ask him a couple questions, if you don't mind. And then
sure, certainly.
Craig, normally when we have this type of argument, there's two parts to the appeal. One would be on a request that we overturn the code enforcement administrator's decision because we disagree with his definition of whatever. That might be a reason. And then the second would be the consideration of the appeal if we uphold the code enforcement administrator. Normally we do the first before the second, don't bother with the second if the first overturns the code enforcement administrator. But it has always been our assumption that if we rule on an appeal, that's the appeal. Now, do I have that correct?
Yes, in general, yes. Although the courts have stated that the zoning board has the ability to take into consideration whether or not a variance is necessary. Basically, you have the same ability that I do to interpret something.
Notwithstanding a request to overturn you.
Right, right.
Okay.
So if you felt that something being presented or interpretation or an application of the ordinance was not necessary, you do have the ability to analyze that first and make that determination. Okay. The unfortunate part here is that I do not have anything prepared formally to advise you. So my comment to you as a board, before you make any interpretation of that nature, would be to seek advice from legal counsel and or allow me an opportunity to prepare a formal presentation for you.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If you have any questions,
Well,
I should say.
I just want to make sure I'm not confused, which could be at this moment. I can appreciate the applicant feeling they may not need a variance, but that's not what's in front of us. This is my feelings. What's in front of us, you did not appeal the administrator's decision. You applied for a variance. That's what's here in front of you. So, and I agree with Mr. Walker that if the board feels that they don't need this variance, we can say they don't need it. But those are 2 points. The third point, I'm confused with what because you seem to have said, both of you, two different things. And looking at the material in front of us and what was noticed, 27.8% of the property, it says in here, is going to be impervious. That doesn't include, according to your application, the panels. It's because, again, that's what the material is. It says that however, once constructed, posts, pads, and roads associated with the solar panels will be the only new impervious surface. This impervious area represents approximately 27.8% of the total property, not 2 point something. And this says 27.8 doesn't include the panels. So I just want to make sure, which seems to be different than what council just said and what you just said.
Sure. So there does seem to be some discrepancies in the application, and I'll just reiterate, the 27.8% is the panel areas, inclusive of the roads, the posts, and the inverter pads. So including the panels.
Includes the panels.
Yeah, and I would suggest that the term impervious for that area is inaccurate. The actual impervious, as it's interpreted in other states, would be the posts, the roads, and the inverter pads, which is the 2.5%.
And again, I can appreciate the other states going with what we have here in Concord in front of us and what was submitted. Sure. I completely understand. So again, so the 27.8 includes the panels.
Correct, yes. And if I could just follow up on this a little bit, I think we wanted to make that case. We wanted to sort of bring that to the board's attention, that we don't feel like, and most stormwater experts don't interpret the panels themselves as being impervious. We've worked very closely with Mr. Walker. He's been tremendous, and his guidance has been invaluable throughout this whole process. We just wanted to bring that to your attention, and we're fully prepared to make the case of why we need a variance.
But then why didn't you appeal the administrator's decision?
I mean, it's part and parcel of the same issue. I mean, as I had mentioned earlier, and as Mr. Walker had stated, it's within your plenary authority to make the decision. Geez, we actually don't even need to confront the issue of whether a variance is required in this case, because it wasn't necessary to begin with. And so I think that's the reason. If you look at the the variance criteria, you know, I do this, I sit on the zoning board in Hanover myself. I know it's hard, okay? It's hard to get a variance in the state of New Hampshire. And so I also know, and we're going to address why the particular application of the variance criteria to this project becomes unreasonable in a second. But this is a really good project. And it's a project that the City of Concord, the kind of project the City of Concord has identified as something they want to foster. But one of the things that occurs to you, or the only conclusion you can draw when you look at the zoning ordinance, is you can't do it. You can't do it in this city unless you get a variance. And so acknowledging the difficulty in getting a variance under New Hampshire law, so not just in this city or any city, it's just it's a hard standard to meet. We wanted to offer that alternative to this board if it believes, as we do, that this is a project that the city wants and would want. That at the end of the day, if you look very carefully at this, there isn't a need for a variance. And so we'll leave it there and acknowledge the assistance of Mr. Walker in helping put all this together. But
Okay, if you could pause for a moment.
yeah.
Because I'd like to chat with my fellow board members about this. It's an unusual situation for us. We heard, if I understood it correctly, Craig's advice that if we wanted to consider the question of whether or not a variance is needed, it might be a good idea to get some more information from other sources, legal consultation. And you said that was there somebody else or some?
Well, certainly the city solicitor would be able to help advise you on this, but I could prepare a more formal explanation of why I've made the interpretation that this is impervious surfaces and why it requires a variance. I did not prepare that for this evening, I'm sorry.
I just want to hear what other people think about this. My reaction is if they're asking us to consider that, we're not in a position to do it yet.
That would be correct. I would agree with that.
I would agree.
You mean rule against the code enforcement?
Even consider it.
Well, and again, I've seen this from the other side, Craig's point, and from applicant side. I'm not prepared to say they don't need a variance right now, because I may hear testimony from the public that says why of course they need a variance. I just, and again, I wish if they had felt they didn't need one, they appealed the decision, because the board has every opportunity with every case to say, I don't even think you need this, I think it meets zoning. Every case we have that opportunity. It usually isn't presented that way by the applicant. But I wouldn't want to say at this point that I think it doesn't need a variance. I would want to hear more information. I was also ready to hear the case as it was submitted.
Chris, if we deny the variance and then they challenge the code enforcement's interpretation, can they continue to do that and come back to us with that?
Maybe that's a Craig question.
I believe they could.
Okay. Here's part of my problem here. The first page of their application says, I think, Laura, you read this earlier. Mm-hmm. The open space, all right, the property is 68.6 acres. And once installed, the solar facility will utilize approximately 54 acres, which is 70-something% of the site for solar panels, inverter stations, and access roads. However, once constructed, the area under the solar panels will be vegetated and will act as a meadow. Post, pads, and roads with the same solar panels will be the only, this is small type, impervious areas. This impervious area represents 27.8% of the property. So I have seen nothing here that would indicate that they meet the 10%. So there's no way we could rule on that decision if we have nothing here that documents that they're going to be 9.8% coverage.
Well, if I could just add to that, I think the key part is we were interpreting it sort of in line with Mr. Walker for the purposes of the application and suggesting that the area beneath the panels was counted in that, whereas the 2.5% is really just that post area, right? So not that full area beneath the panels.
We certainly have nothing to go on to indicate that you meet the 10%, so I think.
If you were to accept that interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, I think we,
I'm prepared to hear the variance side that's asked for, but as far as what I consider essentially an appeal of the administrator's decision, I don't think we're prepared. I agree with, I think everyone else, I don't think we're prepared to hear that tonight. And it sounds like they could separately, procedurally, I've never seen it that way. It always seems to be packaged together.
So
but
we could be in a situation, if we proceeded tonight, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I just want to see if I understand the implications. We could be in a situation where, let's say we hear the variance appeal, we turn the variance appeal down for the usual reasons. We've heard it under the assumption that the code enforcement administrator's interpretation is correct, that the panels themselves represent impervious surface, and they're X number of percent of the lot. We could be in the situation then, if we later come back after consultation with city solicitor and whoever else, Craig, on the subject of why it might be one way as opposed to the other, and overturning our own decision by deciding we didn't need to make it in the first place. Now, does that make any sense? Or would it be better to table the case, get whatever background information we need, and start with a properly noticed discussion about whether or not this really is a 27% coverage? It's a question, not a statement.
I wonder if that's the applicant's decision.
Well, I guess
Because if they want to go ahead
it certainly
and
could be
appeal
the
a variance, then I certainly think that we could.
But as Chris pointed out, it still leaves the ability for them to challenge it, I think, at a later date.
It seems to me the cart and the horse have gotten
Mixed up
twisted
a
up
bit.
here.
It would also, and again, it just seems confusing of what percentage goes with what, would be helpful to actually have. And also, if you don't believe the interpretation of impervious is correct, why? Because that's nowhere in here. You're just sort of verbally telling us why you don't agree with the ordinance or Mr. Walker's interpretation, or even, again, how things are being measured, panel, no panel, just a post, because none of that's in here.
Yeah.
And even just on the front cover, I think there's a little bit of number definition listing errors. So.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that, and I think that can be clarified. Also, just to address the point of the type being very small, we were using your form.
And the more words you put, the smaller the font.
Yeah, the smaller it gets. I guess if we decide to.
Can we submit a memorandum?
Yeah,
Yes, you can.
change
Yeah,
it.
yeah, you
Just
can.
right.
You
Either that or
can
you're going to have
add-
to provide us with microscopes.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, happy to do that as well, but.
So I guess my question to you gentlemen is, would you like to recess this case and address some of the issues that we've raised so that we don't get tangled up in a procedural conundrum when we're trying to make a decision here? Because we can proceed, but I think we would proceed under the assumption that the code enforcement administrator was correct, and then I'm having a hard time understanding how we go back and say he wasn't.
We're consulting. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'll stop talking, I'll let you do it.
It's a TV show, Family Feud.
Yeah.
Good catch on that. I didn't notice that.
I'm like, that doesn't, the math's not working.
Gentlemen.
So our preference would be to table this and address the lot coverage issue and the impervious area, make it a little bit more easy to digest. If that works for you guys, I think procedurally that seems to be a better fit.
And it might give us a chance, since we know this is coming, to get a little bit of information on our own.
And I appreciate that, and I apologize on my behalf that we brought this up tonight. It was an analysis we were doing as we were looking at the ordinance in preparation for tonight's hearing, and it's a great opportunity for both the city and we to build a good record on that question. And I do think that hopefully this isn't the only time you're going to be considering a project like this, and perhaps it'll be useful procedurally going forward.
We have two choices. We can table, in which case you come back when you come back, or we can recess till next month.
If they table, do they, can they add the administrators, and appeal the administrator's decision to this same, because shouldn't,
Actually, it probably just needs to be, well, it can be tabled, but if it comes back as a different appeal, it would probably have to be treated as an original appeal.
And renoticed and all that.
Yes.
because, you know, assuming there's people in the public who want to speak in opposition, they should probably have the right to know exactly what the argument's going to be, so they could, in addition to yourself, you know, argue against it.
And generally, you know, a recess is just to postpone continued hearings and discussions on a case that's been fully noticed and noticed to the public.
Nothing changes but the date.
Right. If something changes, though, within that, then it really needs to be publicly noticed again and resubmitted, I think.
It sounds like tabling is the better way to do that.
Well, if it
That's when it's renoticed?
Could it be that if you table it, and if it changes substantially, they could just be renoticed?
Correct.
That
It
would
comes
be up
back
to
as
the
a new
Just
case.
become a
applicant.
new case and the other one goes
Right.
away.
Yeah.
The applicant would.
It
make
sounds
that
like it
work
should be
for-
renoticed, because you really do have kind of a theory that's somewhat different than what you know, what you.
Or withdrawn without prejudice.
I would just worry, I wouldn't want to encounter any appeal deadline issues. I mean, if we agree here that we can do that, and
If we table it, you come back when you're ready.
and we'll just amend our appeal essentially, and if necessary, you'll renotice it based on the new content.
Yeah, it would function like a new appeal. It's just, we won't act on it tonight, essentially, is what it amounts to, which means we're not telling you yes or no. You're in no different situation than when we walked in, as far as the Board of Appeals is concerned.
But he's concerned about if it's a new case, if they missed any statutory deadlines for
Yeah.
appeal. It would be up to probably Craig and the applicant to decide whether a notice is necessary. It'd still be the same case, perhaps.
Well, again, there's been no decision or determination made on this case. So, if it's tabled, it stays there on the table open. There's no appeal deadlines until a determination or decision has been made that I'm aware of.
I mean, from your decision, I just wanted to make sure, because there are reasonability parameters on
Well,
it.
okay, it is a 30-day appeal period from my decision. Normally, that's has been interpreted, that's from the date I originally issue my interpretation. So you're not appealing my interpretation right now, I don't think. I think what you are discussing is the application of the ordinance. I mean, if you wanted to appeal my interpretation, it probably should have happened the first time we had a discussion about it with you as an applicant, and where I did explain my thoughts and feelings behind that situation. I think that period has long since passed. So if at this point in time you're asking the board to interpret the ordinance, which I think the courts have said they have the ability to do, this is no longer necessarily an appeal of my interpretation. The board is seeking more information to be able to make an informed decision and interpretation of the ordinance.
That makes sense to me. And so in terms of procedure, if we submit additional content for the record for you to consider, you're going to then evaluate that and see whether new notice needs to be added.
Craig will make a decision about notice, but a decision will be made. There will be a new notice anyway, because when you decide you'd like us to take it off the table, it'll get noticed as part of the agenda for whatever month that is, next month or a subsequent month.
That works.
Yeah.
That's good for us.
So we appreciate the flexibility.
Thank you.
All right. Do I hear a motion to table the appeal?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I skipped the discussion part. I figured we'd already had it. The motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Added as we went along.
That's a new one on me.
Yeah, that was,
Well,
similar to what was discussed with the South Main Street case there, the old Crossroads convenience store and the interpretation of whether or not they needed to apply for a variance on the parking because what they were doing, they kind of asked the same thing in that case.
If they came to you with background that showed that their impervious surface met the 10%, could you just say, fine, you meet it, they don't even have to come to us?
If somebody
If you
comes
felt
to me
comfortable that was-
well, at this point, I don't think I can because the...
You've already ruled? Okay.
Well, and the question has been brought to the board.
I see.
If in discussion, information is brought to my attention, which I feel might influence my determination, then I can take that into consideration. But once I have made that decision, and my decision has been reviewed too, and it's supported. The option at that point then is to challenge it, I think. Okay. This is a little new territory too.
Okay.
So.
Next case this evening is case 0718, the Pierce Brigade. The applicant wishes to convert 800 plus or minus square feet of accessory office area to a principal professional office use and requests a variance to Article 2824J, the Table of Principal Uses, to permit a principal office use where such is not permitted for property located at 14 Horseshoe Pond Lane in a residential open space portion of a property transected by an RN residential neighborhood, RO district boundary with HI Historic District and SP Shoreline Protection District overlays. Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify, please?
My name is Martin Bender. I'm a member of the Pierce Brigade, and this is Joan Woodhead, who is the president of the Pierce Brigade.
Thank you, Mark.
What would you like us to know?
Well, well, first of all, I think we need a little bit of history. The Pierce Brigade was formed in 1969, I think. They moved the house from Montgomery Street to where it is right now on, as you can see, on Horseshoe Pond. In 2004, the library, the political library, merged with the Pierce Brigade. The Pierce Manse. The Pierce Manse is the only house that Franklin Pierce, our 14th president, ever owned. And unfortunately, he's not available tonight, and I wish he was, because he was a real orator. Yes, I'm going to have to talk. So anyway, the political library merges. The political library puts quite a bit of money into it. They take the barn, make the barn into two exhibit areas, and upstairs they have an office, and that was approved by the zoning board. I believe it was just a special exception. The political library, unfortunately, ran out of money in 2009, and they're now in St. Anselm's, and it's all back to the Pierce Brigade. And the Pierce Brigade, not knowing that made any difference, the Pierce Brigade rented out the office space to the New Hampshire Lakes Association, and they needed more space last year, and so it has been vacant, and of course we found out that it was not okay for us to rent it. And so we're here for a variance. Let me give you my criteria for the variance. And starting with basically, why is this, it is not contrary to the public interest. Well, in the area, as you can see right over there, there is already, first of all, the Lutheran Church has, they have a lot of activity there because they have a preschool area. That, I think they needed a special exception for in 96, I think. Also, there is the Kimball Jenkins is also in that area. Kimball Jenkins has been here quite often, and in fact, the Kimball Jenkins has a business office in there. There's also a bed and breakfast that was approved. So there's plenty of activity in this area. And I think the, of course, substantial justice, because again, I'm reading off the list of what we need, to meet for the simplex criteria. The substantial justice, well, the Pierce Brigade, of course, it's all volunteer. The Pierce Brigade manages the Pierce Manse. We're only open from the middle of June through Labor Day. Everything is volunteer. Nobody's paid anything. What we do need, however, is the money that comes in from that rent. And we might end up, at its best, we might get $1,000 a month. So substantial justice, it's because we need it, okay? Yeah, I'm trying to think. What was I going to say? The value of this area, the value of the area is not diminished. Of course, since it has been this way since at least 2004 with that office there, nobody has had any objection to it. Nobody feels that it has hurt their property value. Not contrary to the public interest, again, nobody has said anything, nobody has any objections, at least none of our neighbors have any objections to the office space. The only criteria seems to be, and I'm pointing out that the problems in the area have been parking. That's the parking area for the Lutheran Church, for their preschool kindergarten. It's obviously also a problem for Kimball Jenkins. One of the things that the Pierce Brigade does not have a problem with is parking. There is, I would say, at least room for probably at least 12 or 15 cars to be parked off the street. So that takes care of the parking problems. I'm going through the simplex, criteria, and the variance would not injure the public or private. There is absolutely no harm here if we have the variance for the office. No fair and substantial relationship, and again, this, as I pointed out, there is no objection from any of our neighbors. And the only real problem that we have is the zoning restriction as applied interferes with a landowner's reasonable use of the property, considering their unique setting. And I really don't see much unique about it, except perhaps it is that much room for parking. So I think that basically this is simply going ahead with what was already done at Kimball Jenkins, what was done at Lutheran Church, and I ask simply that the board grant us a variance.
How many, as I look at the floor plan, it's 3 offices, 3, you'd rent to one tenant who would occupy those 3 offices?
Right, yes.
And when you rented before, how many people were involved, do you remember?
There were originally 3, they grew, and that's why they moved.
Okay.
So it's 3 people, sometimes they'll have 4, they would have seasonal help in there.
Okay.
And they could, a lot of their people would go out to the lakes and so forth, so they weren't actually in the manse
Right.
that worked for them.
Other questions from the board?
On this large map,
Yes.
it shows a little addition off the barn. That's not what we're talking about, right?
No, that was never done.
Okay. So this is existing above the barn.
Right. And the barn was put there sometime in the 70s. It was just simply, it was a barn until, of course, 2004, when it became office space and, of course, the two exhibition
Thanks
areas.
to Mr. Carley.
Another question for you, Craig.
Sure.
What, the RN district, which a portion of the property is in, does that allow professional offices?
No, it's residential neighborhood zoning. And the portion of the property that the Pierce Manse is located in is in the RN district. It's the back half of the property, I believe, that's in the RO district, but.
According to this, the building is actually an RO, but.
You know, I could be wrong on that.
I thought it was entirely in the RO.
Yes, it is. Okay. I stand corrected, or sit corrected.
So the only difference, it's basically a restricted, a non-permitted use in both those districts.
Correct.
And we got a couple overlays for good luck on there, too. Other questions from the board? Thank you very much. Is there anyone here who would like to testify in favor of the appeal? Please come forward. If you all would step down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I speak from here?
No, please come on up.
Okay.
You have to be within the aura.
I see.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
Yes, Thomas Fisk.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Fisk?
Well, I'm the vice president of the Pierce Brigade. I'm also a docent of the Pierce Brigade and a docent of the New Hampshire Historical Society. I think it's a fact and fairly accurate to say that historical homes and museums do not make money and therefore rely on other income because what comes through the door cannot finance the needs of the house or any other facility that we would have. And I think it's very important that we have some sort of other income other than the admission fee, because certainly an admission fee will not cover the needs of maintaining an 1838 house. And that would be terrible, because the house is part of not only New Hampshire history, certainly it's Concord history as well. And to have that go by the boards because of an inability to finance it properly, I think that would be a travesty.
Any questions for Mr. Fisk? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition? Any comments from code enforcement?
Just for point of clarification, the variances that were granted in 2005 were to permit a library and museum. At that point in time, these offices would have been accessory to that use. As a historic place, visitor center, again, accessory, or the offices would remain accessory use. So the change here is they're just asking that the offices be allowed to be a principal use within the building.
Correct. Is a museum a permitted use in this district?
You're just double checking that. It's a historic property, well, library and museum did require a variance.
For that particular use?
Correct.
Okay.
This is classified as historic property used as a visitor center. So they're two separate uses. That, I believe, it's either permitted by right or a conditional use permit in the district, and at any rate, it's well vested.
I just wonder if it's a non-conforming use as it presently is. I think that might be a factor in my
I don't know the answer.
Works better.
Seems a historic house in a historic district would be a conforming use.
Oh, sorry, yes, except that it's open to the public, then it really qualifies more as a museum.
Yeah, it is a museum of sorts, yeah.
So, Oh, it is, they charge admission.
Yep, oh yeah, it's a museum. They, people go in, and I don't know if it's still true, but the barn was a museum too, after the renovation.
So as a historical property used as a visitor attraction in the RO or the RN district, today, if it was being established, it would be a special exception, which basically means it's a use permitted by right, but it needs to be site appropriate.
Very good. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request to allow a principal use of 3 offices in the attic of the existing barn at the Franklin Pierce Manse, so that the Franklin Pierce Manse organization can gain some income. The principal use of an office space in the area is not permitted. Discussion.
Though I appreciate the need for revenue as a nonprofit, that doesn't really factor into my consideration. But what does is the fact that there are other similar uses in that area, just up the street a little bit. You get up onto North State Street, go down the other way, you have Kimball Jenkins, you have a church that has office space. Having a small office space, that again, the size of it will limit the amount of traffic. They have off-street parking. Though it's unfortunate it's been in violation for all those years. No one knew about it, which sort of says that it's not really detrimental to the neighborhood. I don't advocate that as a way to justify a variance, but I don't think that granting this will harm anybody. I think it's a good use of the space.
Would you care to make a motion?
I was going to let other people talk first,
All right.
but...
Well, we can always talk after the motion's made. Other thoughts? Anyone? Nick, anything?
I agree with pretty much everything Laura said.
All right.
Therefore, then I will make a motion to grant the variance as requested.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. The next case this evening is 0818, Carol and Roger Brooks. The applicant wishes to construct a 995-square-foot single-story addition to an existing residential structure and requests a variance to Article 28.4.1H, the Table of Dimensional Regulations, to permit the addition to have a minimum setback of 5 feet 4 inches plus or minus from the northwesterly side of the lot line, where a 15-foot setback is required for property located at 11 Auburn Street in an RS residential single-family district. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify, please?
I'm Roger Brooks, and I'm, along with Carol Brooks, the owner of 11 Auburn Street. And today we seek a variance to build a one-story addition to our existing home.
Would you like to fill us in on the details of...
I would, and we have our architect with us, Claude Gentillon, who may need to be sworn in as well.
You swear to tell the truth but the truth.
Okay, thank you. My name is Carol Brooks, co-owner of 11 Auburn Street, and we have lived on that property for over 31 years, raised 2 boys. It's a fine family house. It has bedrooms on the second, and then in the past, a 3rd floor attic was made into a master bedroom. We are getting older in years. The boys have moved on, and we find a need to have a 1st floor accommodation, especially for bedroom and a full bath, and that's the reason for this variance application. Our lot is 55 feet wide and 198 feet deep. The 55 is on Auburn Street, and the house was built in 1894 by Charles Green, who worked for the B&M Railroad, and quite a few years after that point, zoning regulations came into play. So the zoning setbacks, which were imposed by the current ordinance, are 15 feet setback on the northwesterly side, which is the side in question that we're here tonight to seek a variance. We would like to extend the existing line of the first story, which is the kitchen and family room, and create an additional 995 feet of square footage to create the bedroom and the bathroom in order to age in place as we get older and have doorways made wide enough for future use. There is no bedroom currently on the first floor, and that apparently was a Grand Victorian tradition. The bedrooms are upstairs, so I don't know what the Victorians did with their elders, but they did not accommodate them on the first floor. We seek approval to extend the current building line and to extend it and no further encroach on a distance to our boundary line. As you can see on the plans that we submitted, the kitchen addition, which is a one-story addition, is approximately 5 feet 5 inches from the northwesterly boundary. And the 15-foot side setback that was later imposed on the property cuts through basically the middle of the house. So we are planning to stay with that same line and no further. The zoning ordinance, as I mentioned, was put in place after the land was subdivided and the house constructed in 1894. We'd like to age in place and need better first floor accommodations. And we had contacted and shown plans for to all of our direct abutters, as well as many on the 300-foot abutter requirement, and had no objections and found full support for those people we contacted. Other people that we contacted, knocked on doors, were not there, so we, unless they've shown up tonight to speak in opposition, we do not have any report on them. As we age, this first floor addition will allow us to remain in the home and would not affect other properties in terms of adverse effect. Neighbors on the northerly side, neighbors on the southerly side, and on our back lot line, we have two on the back lot line, are in support. We wouldn't be increasing the demand on any public service or any public safety issues by extending the house line as indicated. And the character of the neighborhood would not be changed because the addition is going to carry through the architectural detail of the main part of the house, built in 1894, and have similar windows that are divided on top and basically on the bottom. And there would be no interference with any abutters' use of their property by putting in this addition because we're well within our boundary line. The general public would not gain from a denial of a variance. In fact, if denied, we would not be able to create and live on our property in our coming years, which hopefully are many. A couple of other items I would want to mention is we don't see any diminution in value. In fact, the current family room addition that was put on long before we moved in 1986 is an addition that is basically a box and is uninsulated, and we intend on improving that and adding a fully insulated family room and bedroom to stabilize that with architectural details that far surpass the basic box that is there for the family room on the back side of the kitchen. Also, if you stand on Auburn Street with your back to, or your front to our house, the street view would not be adversely affected or diminished, so that you probably, if you're walking on the sidewalk after the addition hopefully is allowed and put in, you would just see an extension of the current lines of the house and nothing more. We did contact many of the neighbors, and we brought the top copy as an original. We made copies for all of you. Each of our supporting direct abutters and supporting neighbors signed a support list, and we have some supporters in the audience. So we would ask for a variance to continue the line of the existing first story indicated on our plans. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there questions from the board? Nick, anything?
Well, the only question I have is, you have a rather sizable winemaking operation indicated on this. Is that going to be an accessory use, or is it strictly a hobby?
In our discussion with our architect, he thought it would be amusing to put that in. But yes, I do make wine as a hobby.
And not for resale, I should add.
Mail order sales would be permitted.
Not even that.
Are there other questions from the board?
Later.
After we got through the wine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here who wishes to be heard in favor? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do. I'm Robert Spiegelman, 13 Auburn Street. We are the neighbors on the northwesterly side of the house, who's probably the most concerned about this as anybody, and we have no concerns. We are happy to give our consent that this work be done. We'll continue an existing line, and it'll enable us to keep our nice neighbors for even longer.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition? Any comments from code enforcement?
I have nothing to add unless you have specific questions.
We do have here the sign sheet request for a variance, expressing support for the request for a variance. I'm not going to read all the names out. It's in the record. It appears that there's, I don't know, maybe 17 or 18 signatures on here. With that, I guess we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing and begin discussion. We have a request to extend an existing narrow house on a narrow lot straight back. The house itself, as you can see from the plan, already impinges on the setback considerably, and the addition would impinge to the same extent.
Comment?
Yeah.
I'm looking at this aerial photo here, and it's not an unreasonable request to expand the size of their house. It's significantly smaller than the ones around it. And so to me, the hardship is they really can't expand, which is a reasonable use, and meet the setback requirements, because if they met that side setback, they'd impinge on the other side. So I think this is a very reasonable request. I think it's addressing, it's not going to affect the neighborhood. If you look at it from the front, I don't think anybody but their direct neighbor will ever notice it's been done, because it's going to shoot straight back from there. They're going to keep the architecture. It's not going to increase traffic. I just think it's a very reasonable request. And I will move that we grant the variance.
Is there a second?
And I'll second it. And speaking to the hardship issue, I see this in looking at the signatures that was submitted. There's a nice map of the area, and it certainly does confirm my thought that this is probably the narrowest lot on Auburn Street. And I think as a result, they probably just denied reasonable use of the lot with that kind of an expansion, which others probably wouldn't have to deal with setback issues. Secondly, the expansion conforms to the already to the existing line, so there's no further infringement on the setback that exists with the current house. So I'd second the motion.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. The next case on our agenda, which is the last case this evening, is 0918 89 Fort Eddy Road, LLC. The applicant wishes to expand an existing 16,382 square foot health and fitness center into an existing 5,855 square foot plus or minus portion of the building previously occupied by a general retail business, and requests a variance to the Article 2827E, the table of off-street parking, to provide 193 parking spaces where 239 spaces are required for property located at 89 Fort Eddy Road in a GWP Gateway Performance District. Gentlemen, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify, please?
Attorney Michael Courtney, Upton and Hatfield. I represent Planet Fitness. This is.
I'm Steve Venezia. I'm the Associate General Counsel for Planet Fitness.
I think I need to be sworn in first.
Do you swear to tell the truth?
I swear. And my name is Brent Cole with Keach Nordstrom Associates. I'm the civil engineer on the project.
Mr. Chair, before we start, I just wanted to disclose I am a member of Planet Fitness. I just wanted to.
And you look very fit.
Thank you for your membership.
You're welcome.
I don't think that constitutes
I know. I just wanted
a
I just wanted to disclose it.
conflict of interest, unless you do.
No. I feel I can review this objectively.
All right. Gentlemen, would you fill us in on why you feel a variance is appropriate here?
I'd like to very briefly give you a little bit of background on Planet Fitness. As I said, my name is Steve Venezia. I'm the Associate General Counsel for Planet Fitness, so I handle all of their real estate company-wide, which includes 1,500 plus locations in the U.S., Canada, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Panama, and 68 of those locations are corporate locations, corporately owned. The rest are franchise locations. Concord is a corporately owned location, and it was our third location out of those 1,500 plus locations. Our roots are in Dover, New Hampshire originally 25 years ago, and we're very proud of those locations. We're very proud of our roots here in New Hampshire. We're still headquartered in Hampton, New Hampshire, so we value that. Concord opened on May 1st of 1998, so our 20-year anniversary at that site is rapidly approaching. The renovation gives us an opportunity to stay in that location. We've had opportunities to relocate, but we really want to stay there. As you know, we pride ourselves on tons of cardio, clean working equipment, and friendly, knowledgeable staff. We're a publicly traded company, and we are the fastest growing health club model in the world. We consider ourselves the judgment-free gym. In fact, in a lot of cases, we're not a gym. We cater to first-time gym goers. We call them the 80%. 80% of people right now don't have gym memberships. And we value we have a partnership with Boys and Girls Club. We do judgment-free sponsors with them, stomp out bullying, and that's just something we really value and we would like to have known. The expanded club will be 22,615 square feet. The co-tenants at this site in that outbuilding, as you see on the left there, occupy 88,376 square feet. As part of our project, so you're aware, we're planning on adding cardio, moving the front entrance, so we'll have a brand new front entrance and storefront, so the exterior will be revamped as well. We're adding strength equipment. We're moving our wet areas, and so if anybody's been into this particular gym, for lack of a better term, the wet areas are subpar, is the way I'll put it very nicely. We're moving those elsewhere, so there'll be brand new locker rooms, floor to ceiling tile up to the current standards of our membership, adding new HVAC and mechanical systems, as well as new flooring throughout, and there'll be an improved layout which will be more member friendly and have better, we call it the Black Card amenities, but upscale amenities for our members. One of the things that I would just like you to be aware of is that, we're very familiar with our parking requirements as Planet Fitness. We do these sites all over the country. We generally require about 120 non-exclusive parking spots per club. So what that means is we share those. A lot of times we're with grocers, we're with other uses, and we like to see about 120 sites available to us. Here, there'd be 193 parking spots. I've done a study on a similar sized gym here in New Hampshire, and during our busiest time of year, which is January, when everybody's still holding strong to those New Year's resolutions, and our busiest time of day is between 4 and 8 p.m., busiest days of the week are Monday through Wednesday, with a pairing off Thursday through Friday, and the weekends it's hard to find anybody there. But the parking demand during that time on a Monday would be 90, Tuesday 95, Wednesday 81, Thursday 68, Friday 51, Saturday 55, and Sunday 65. To clarify, I'm sorry, those are check-ins, okay? So those are check-ins at the club. For those folks who go together, it would not be 95 cars there, but there'd be more than ample parking for those cars if they were available. I'm going to let Brent and Mike sort of speak to the other details of the project, what it's going to do to the parking, the vegetation, et cetera. But I wanted to thank you all very much for letting us, come here and present this to you, and we hope to be working, with the city in the future.
Clarification. Sure. The parking, was that a daily count you were giving us?
Yeah, so those daily counts, not necessarily at any one time, but those are check-ins daily during our peak times of the year.
And that's for Concord?
That is not for Concord, no. That is for a comparable gym. To do it for Concord wouldn't really be fairly representing the number. It would be lower because it's a smaller gym right now, so we really wanted to use a larger location to give you guys a fair estimate.
Do you have a check-in account available to us for Concord?
I don't currently, here today. I certainly could get that provided to you.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure I understood. So the numbers you gave are check-in times at your peak time. That's not a daily check-in. That's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 to 8.
No. That's those days. That's at any one time.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So those days, but at any one time, the maximum amount you would have.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry if I confused you.
Thank you, Steve. For the record, again, my name is Brent Cole. The existing development is known to you guys as the Merrimack Center. It resides at 89 Fort Eddy Road, and if you're unfamiliar with this area, Market Basket's across the street, and it's basically surrounded by state land, the campus to the north. If you look at sheet 1 of your plan set, this is the existing conditions plan. You'll find that Merrimack Center is home to a variety of uses, including beauty salons, fitness studios, a new barbecue restaurant that's pretty good, and Planet Fitness, and is a vacant spot, which used to be Cobblestone Florist. Planet Fitness is hoping to take over this vacant spot, like Steve explained. Over the course of many years, the use of this parcel has changed, and the parking spots have kind of been piecemealed together. It's created a real inefficient parking lot. According to the zoning ordinance, the current use that exists today require 214 spaces, but there's only 168 on site. Even though the parking lot is dated and lacks functionality, there are enough parking spaces for all the particular uses on site. So Planet Fitness, like I said, is looking to take over the old Cobblestone Florist. If you look at the next 2 sheets of your plan set, you'll find that Planet Fitness hopes to redevelop the entire site. This site will be more nearly conforming to Concord site plan regulations. The entrance of the site will remain in the same location, but ADA pedestrian access will be brought from Fort Eddy Road through the site to the existing buildings. The parking spaces will be situated more efficiently and safe. 360-degree access will remain around the building, and the exit only will be relocated a little bit further west. The site will be heavily landscaped, as you can see from the plan behind me. New site lighting, new signage. There will be a fence that circulates the property. Dumpsters will have proper screening. And last but not least, stormwater will be properly handled, which it is not today. So with the change of use from the old Florist to the Planet Fitness, the entire site will require 239 spaces. We are only proposing 193, and this is a 25-space increase for the change of use from the Florist to the Planet Fitness.
So, sorry, but so the other tenants, do they have their own parking, or is this also
This is
include-
all for one site.
It's including those
Yep,
tenants too?
Exactly. So according to the zoning ordinance, the change of use from the florist to the gym requires 25 spaces. That's how we came up with 193. There's 168 on site. Our change of use requires 25, 193. There is a provision in your ordinance that allows for future parking, but as you can see from the site, we are completely maxed out here, and there's no room for future parking to be placed on the site. It should be noted that all this work, and even though we're increasing parking, we're actually reducing impervious by making the site more efficient, and we're increasing internal green space. I think that's really important, and that just goes to show you that this site is extremely inefficient, and the functionality of it can be better.
Did I understand you say that in your design, proposed design, there are 193 spaces?
Post-design, 193 spaces. Okay. The 8.5 by 11 that I just handed out to you kind of shows the contrast between the existing site and an architectural rendering of what we're hoping to propose. This parcel needs to be enhanced to follow suit with Fort Eddy Road and the development that's already occurred out there, and we feel like this design best does that. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Courtney.
Thanks, Brent. Going through the hardship or the variance requirements, I want to talk about the hardship requirement first. As you can see, Planet Fitness is an existing use, and it's reasonable to expand that use to the vacant cobblestone. But because of the property's size and shape, we really have no way to add all the parking that is required in the change of use. We are adding the parking that's required for the change use, those 25 spaces, but we are maxed out based on the size of the property and the shape of the property. As Brent and Steve stated, this property has been used with 168 spaces for, at least Planet Fitness has been there for 20 years. It's reasonable to allow Planet Fitness to improve the parking, the traffic flow, and at this point, there is really no substantial relationship between the exact parking, off-street table parking requirements and what this site has been using. If we're going to talk about the substantial justice component, this is in the Gateway Performance District, and what we want the Gateway Performance District to be is a representation of lots that are feasible, functional. This is on an arterial road, so we want to make sure it's easy for people to get in and out. And that's what this project's going to be doing. Adding parking, adding functionality, adding aesthetics, adding green spaces. That's similar to the factors 3 and 4, which you all know, about, will the variance result in substantial justice and will not be contrary to the public interest. What that means, essentially is it going to change the character of the neighborhood. And in this case, this is in the Gateway Performance District. We have mixed uses, commercial uses. This is only going to help the neighborhood by bringing it into a cohesive unit with traffic flow and aesthetics. So we believe it would pass those factors. And because we're increasing traffic, we're increasing the greenscape, the green space, and because we're also going to be making the building more functional, and it's just going to be a lot pleasing to drive by and to be a member at. That's going to only improve values of properties around that. It's not going to decrease the values. If there's any specific questions, I'd be glad to take those. If not, thank you.
So am I understanding, are you currently in compliance? Were you in compliance with the parking with cobblestone, or did you have a variance?
No, that was grandfathered, the 168 spaces. So it has 168 spaces now, but because we're changing uses, the whole lot has to require 239, which we can't make.
And converting from a flower shop to a gym increases your per square foot
exactly
need for spaces.
The gym, the fitness, the gym requires one space per 120 square feet, and then the retail is 1 space per 250 square feet. So that was why the 25 spaces had to get added.
So there won't be any change in the square footage to the structure?
No.
Laura, you had a question?
I did. Couple questions. One, where's your snow storage going? There's none shown on the plan.
We at planning board, we will address the snow storage. Currently, there's not a lot of space for snow storage on site today. If there is an adequate space, it will have to be trucked off.
Well, I guess my realistic usually gets put in parking spots. And so looking at your if you can put it back to the pretty picture, because that's how you do it now. It goes in, it gets pushed against the existing fence on the property, which is holding up the snow along the perimeter. But usually in sites like this without adequate snow storage, like the storm we had yesterday, the plow that the company would have hired to maintain the property would be pushing it into parking spaces. So you wouldn't have the 100 and however many spaces you're supposed to have. So your 25 extra spaces you're putting on the site, though I can appreciate it with the new layout, you won't really have that many spots for people to park in because you have no place for the snow to go.
Especially in January.
Or anywhere, at any time, but yes, during the peak time.
Right. With site plan approval, this site will have to meet the regulations and not take up spaces with snow storage. We do have to meet a fairly robust landscape regulation, and what you see is basically that.
Yep.
They will have to manage it according to Concord standards, and if that's trucking it off site, that'll have to be something they have to do.
Which again, I can appreciate, in theory, the planning board process, just like I can appreciate all this green, because there's really nothing out there now except on the perimeter. The landscape strips that are it's just bark mulch and dirt now because of the snow that has been pushed into it over the years. I guess my concern of asking for a variance from the parking requirements, it seems that until such snow gets trucked off, it's going to be in the parking spaces that you don't meet now, that you're asking us to grant relief from. So that's unless I'm missing that.
Are you?
I guess
would you rather us not have more, like open more spaces for storage?
I guess I guess as just looking at this in reality, and again, the snowstorm yesterday was a perfect example. You're seeking relief from this parking standards to not have as many spaces, but in reality, you won't even have that many spaces because you have no snow storage shown on the site. So yes, you may truck it off, but it would have been happening maybe now for a day. You'd be a day late so that's just.
The only way I would respond to that is that, and just so you know, Planet Fitness doesn't remove the snow. The landlord removes the snow in this particular case. So we're not responsible for plow contracting or anything like that. So I can't speak personally to that. Of course. However, I would say that.
Makes it harder than even, but yeah,
yes,
it's not
but
your control.
I would say that, one, we want our members to have parking. We want to go places where our members can park and get in. I'm a former Upton and Hatfield attorney myself. When I was leaving for Planet Fitness, I heard from many, many people in the Concord community, is there any chance you can change things in Concord? Is there any chance you can do anything with the parking lot in Concord? And those were obviously anecdotal requests. And I said, I'll try. And here I am. But I would say this, that if there is any differentiation, there is no area really for snow storage right now. It is inefficient as heck. So if there are 168 spots right now, I would argue that any reduction as a result of a snowstorm would still net you those same 25 spaces, if that makes sense to everybody. Because that snow has got to be put someplace right now, and it's not efficient right now. So it's not, I think the net effect of a plus 25 remains. That's just my opinion. I don't mean to.
No.
Yeah.
There is no parking in the road out there, is there, Craig?
No.
I don't believe along Fort 80 Road there is any parking permitted.
No, I drive that every day, and there's not, unless it's a breakdown.
Okay. Other questions from the board?
But I guess the issue about the parking is that, we've got 3 lanes right there, and I drive by it every night at 5 o'clock, and it's amazing how many people don't know how to use that middle lane to do a left-hand turn into your parking lot. And they come in 2 spaces, which means it ties up traffic trying to get onto the bypass. But I am concerned about the parking because I've heard a lot of remarks about people who don't go in the evening anymore because there's no parking available. And I see this as somewhat of a help to that, to alleviate that, but I don't know if it's enough. I just don't know if I'm persuaded to see that that's enough to meet that. Because I think you could have an increase in membership with the increased space.
We obviously hope that's the case. I mean, I can't say that we don't hope that's the case. However, Concord, under these circumstances, is a very, very successful club for us. I would almost argue surprisingly successful under the circumstances when you've been in the club. It's subpar. We understand that, both from the interior and the exterior. That's why we want to renovate it. So while I think that the hope would be to increase membership, we actually are not necessarily anticipating a major increase in membership. What we're trying to do is keep our existing members, because when they go in right now and there's a hole in the wall, or these wet areas that the way they are, I think that our goal is really to retain those members and to reward them for their loyalty to us. From a population perspective, an increase it would be great for us, but I don't know how likely.
Are some of the spots reserved for the smaller? It's all open to anyone, first come, first served.
We're actually it's 31% compact right now, and we're actually gonna reduce that to 25% compact.
But I think your question is exclusive use for the other tenants?
Yeah, there are a few specific uses that have signage. That signage will remain. We'll find spaces for each use, so they have specific designated spots.
Have they? I'm sure they're aware of the plan. Have they voiced an opinion about this plan?
I've heard nothing but positive. This is going to increase the value of this property exponentially and increase the attractiveness of their businesses.
Because under the current configuration, there were times when there were signs posted in certain parking spots away from the building that basically they were trying to claim for their usage. And I wonder how in this new configuration, how that process might develop.
And I believe, and I can review it again, but I believe our lease does call for non-exclusive parking spots. So basically, there can't be exclusive parking for anybody. Those signs, we'll talk to the landlord, but those signs probably won't be going back up.
Sorry about that.
I don't want to make any representations under oath that I'm certain of that, but I can tell you that those signs probably won't be going back up, and it'll be shared parking. The other thing that I would urge you to keep in mind too is that the cobblestone use is going away. So that a different business that did attract, customers is now going away, where one use is going to take its place. So even if we did increase our membership a little bit, you're not going to have those cobblestone customers there anymore. You're only going to have those Planet Fitness customers occupying those spaces.
Other questions from the board? Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for your time.
Is there anyone who'd like to be heard? Any comments from code enforcement?
No, I have nothing to add.
With that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have a request to allow Planet Fitness to expand into what was formerly a retail florist shop. Their parking requirement is a little more intense than the retail florist shop was. They also have proposed to reconstruct the parking, reconfigure it in the entire lot to increase the number of parking spaces by, I think it was about 30? 25 new ones. There is probably about as much parking in that plan as you could possibly fit on that lot.
Yes. I agree.
Unless you put a double-decker.
Unless you put a double-decker.
My feeling is that, again, the hardship clearly is that the existing structures are there, not being expanding. The use does increase the required parking, but the current uses or the previous uses were non-conforming for parking. Am I correct?
Yes.
Right. So while the new use would continue to be non-conforming, we're going from one non-conforming parking requirement to another. but we are substantially improving the lot, putting 25 more spaces. And Laurie, your snow issue is a good one, but right now, they're probably plowing into parking lots. So the net effect of this 25, in theory, would still yield 25 more spaces available. And I certainly don't think any of the other requirements for the neighborhood and value of the neighboring properties, I think all those are met. It's just a matter of the parking. So, but I do think there's a hardship on that property. There's really not much more they can do.
I mean, the parking in that Planet Fitness is notoriously difficult. Just anecdotally from what I've heard, from what I've seen. So I mean, the only way to improve it would be have a different kind of use. But these guys obviously know their business. I'm sure they get complaints from when people can't find spots, but that still seems to be the most feasible location for them. And given that's the successful use for many years, there's no other parking they can put there. So it's going to have to be non-conforming unless they, like you said, do a double-decker or something pretty much.
The thing is, they've improved the entranceway too, and that's confusing when you come in there. You have sort of three options when you come in, and there's one parking spot right there by the entrance, which makes absolutely no sense at all.
Yeah, the geometry on that lot is inscrutable. You get in there and you don't know what to do.
I'm surprised there probably are actually.
I think to the question of the intent of the ordinance, the intent in my mind of the parking requirements is to make sure that uses that need X amount of parking aren't mooching space from their neighbors, essentially, by filling up the streets with cars because their parking lots are full and inconveniencing the neighbors and changing the neighborhood to because of so many automobiles in it. This is a self-limiting problem because you can't park on the street there. There's no place else to park when you go there except in their lot. So if there's no place to park, people are not going to stay or not going to go to begin with. So I don't see how, under this arrangement, they could violate the intent of the ordinance. All they can do is limit their own business. So it seems a reasonable request to me for the same reason.
I was going to say, I think that what they're proposing is going to be great for the site. I think it's going to make it better. It's a wonderful combination of other businesses on the site because those other businesses are a quicker turnover. That are people that are in there. Their peak hours, or except for the barbecue place, is pretty much different than Planet Fitness. I do have concerns about the snow storage because, and even though I know that when it gets to the planning board, and that may be a requirement, if we grant them as presented with 193 spaces and the snow storage becomes some of those parking spots that go away, doesn't that mean that the variance, if we were to grant it, is not being upheld? Because usually, as someone who's seen this before, usually the snow storage, if you place it, you're going to either take away landscaping or you take away parking spaces. So.
Well, again, I think it is an issue that.
And again, it's an issue there now.
Would be addressed at the planning board level. I would also say that that's probably not a issue that's not uncommon for many of the commercial properties within the city and throughout the Northeast this time of year. I mean, you go down to Store Street Plaza right now.
No,
I just don't see a way around.
No, I'm just saying if we were to grant the variance for 193 spaces and it gets to the planning board and all of a sudden it's 190 spaces because they take 3 of the spaces and make that snow storage.
Then it would have to come back to this board. I'm sorry, I was misunderstanding what you were saying.
No, I understand if that's where you usually store snow when you have an abundance of spaces, and I understand that's what's happening now.
They could
I
not
was
reduce
asking a
it
logistic question.
from what's been approved by this board.
Okay.
All right, does anyone care to make a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. And that concludes our agenda this evening. Do we get minutes? We did get minutes, didn't we?
I believe so.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
I wasn't here, so.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Great minutes. Is there new business?
I have nothing, I mean, you had the discussion with the consultants this past week. A lot of interesting information came out. They met with a number of different groups and focus groups over the course of a couple of days, including staff and such. So now they've headed back to Austin, and we'll see what they come up with next.
All right.
Is that where he was from, Boston?
Yeah, Code Studio is the name of the company.
And they got to enjoy the snow yesterday.
I assumed he was Canadian. That Amber that was with him,
Yeah.
that
Well,
was
he
her
doesn't
first
sound Texan.
snowstorm in her life.
Really? Wow.
Yep, she grew up in Florida and the South.
All right, did we adjourn?
Yeah, I move we adjourn.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.